Okay, class, we are now on a new subject, and this is called respiratory, the respiratory system. The PowerPoint that I am looking at is Respiratory 1. The PowerPoint I'm looking at is Respiratory 1 in my ANP2 section in my private website. All right? Let's see where we are with this. Okay, I asked two questions. Why do we breathe oxygen? What is the ultimate role of the oxygen in the body, and why is the majority of our respiratory system inside our body compared to some of that with fish and other things? Okay? So, we go here. Oxygen's journey. Okay? 98% of the O2 serves to make ATP by going inside the mitochondrion, studied in ANP1, and becoming the terminal acceptor of electrons in the electron transport chain. So in other words, if somebody say, well, why do you breathe O2? Well, you got to get in your lungs. Why do you have to do that? You have to get in your bloodstream. See, that's rhetorical. Final answer, it acts as the terminal acceptor of electrons in the electron transport chain. Now, 2% of the oxygen we breathe actually, unfortunately, becomes a free radical. Okay? It's an oxidant. That's where the word initially came from before they knew other things did it too. All right. So what do we know? We know that here is the mitochondrion right there. Okay. That structure right there. We know here's metabolism. Here's the Krebs cycle. All of this right here happens inside the mitochondrion, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. There's the electron transport chain, makes ATP. The Krebs cycle makes a little, but this is really where the work is, there. Okay. Here's this here. That's the Krebs cycle. Here's that electron transport chain. And basically what happens is oxygen, being highly electronegative, pulls the electrons from the food you eat and some hydrogens, and it acts as the terminal acceptor because it's the most highly electronegative, thus it pulls it. Now remember that when something moves, energy is released. Let's think about it. Energy is the capability to do work. Work is a force times a distance. So therefore, when you move something, you do work. You liberate energy. Okay? So that's the purpose of why we breathe oxygen, to act as the terminal acceptor of electrons in the electron transport chain. Why is the majority of our respiratory system inside our bodies? When living creatures left the waters and came to the terrestrial, which is the land environment, the respiratory system had to be internalized, or the respiratory epithelium would what? Dry out. But it still needed a lot of surface area for enough diffusion of oxygen. We'll see an equation. So you need a lot of surface area. So what happens is that if we went inside you and laid out side by side all the little surface area you have inside the lungs and associated structures, then it would come to about the size of a tennis court. So you have a lot of surface area. And we're going to talk about this diffusion equation a little bit later so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay? So that's the purpose. All right. Now, we go over here, and what I've laid out for you is kind of the journey of your air as it goes down and comes back up, really, with CO2. Okay? So, the air enters through the nose or mouth. Now, here's a couple of things to say. And I'll just say it in this way. If you breathe only from your nose, then you're called an obligate, O-B-L-I-G-A-T, nose breather. Okay? If you breathe only from your mouth, and for some reason you have a lot of nasal congestion or something else, then you are an obligate mouth breather. If you breathe primarily from your nose, but only some from your mouth, then you are a facultative nose breather, because you breathe mainly from your nose, some from your mouth. If you breathe mainly from your mouth, but some from your nose, you're a facultative mouth breather. Now, that's just something to bring up because some of you breathe from your mouth more than your nose, and some breathe from the nose. Now, actually, what's really supposed to happen? The nose, because you got the nose hair and the mucous membrane and everything to do that. So, and it warms, filters, and moistens the air, as we'll talk about. Okay, let's go further. The air then passes to the back of the nose and the back of the mouth into an area called the pharynx that we'll talk about. The pharynx is divided into three regions. The area of the pharynx behind the nose is called the nasopharynx. The area of the pharynx behind the mouth is called the oropharynx. Both of these come together in the laryngopharynx. See, it's around the laryngopharynx that the two pipes take their deviation. You say, what two pipes am I talking about? Well, you know, food, air, and water, liquids, go down in the mouth, right? Okay? So what will happen? So that means then somewhere down the road, there had to be a bifurcation in the road so that food and liquids would go into the esophagus, which is going to be in the digestive system, and air would go into the trachea, the windpipe. Now, let's just be honest, and I'm sure you know this without even taking this course. There's really no problem with air going down the esophagus. It happens all the time. It just goes into the stomach. It happens all the time. But there is a major life-threatening problem if food or liquid goes into the windpipe. It's not adapted for that. And that's what we call aspiration. That's where the Heimlich maneuver and all that other stuff comes in. Okay? So the laryngopharynx is kind of at that bifurcation where the two tubes are gonna separate. It's really right before that laryngopharynx. It's really right before. Then after that, where's the air go? To the larynx. The larynx we're gonna call the voice box, let's say. That's where your vocal cords are. We'll look at that. Then from the larynx, we're gonna go into the trachea. Okay? Then the trachea, we're gonna go into what we call bronchi. And of the bronchi, the first bronchi, which would be the primary bronchi, maybe I'll put it there, primary bronchi. Now, bronchi is plural. Bronchi is plural. Let the computer catch up here. P-R-O-N-C-H-I. The primary bronchi, which is the main stem, and it goes to the lungs. Now, bronchi is plural, and I'll put the singular up here for you. Bronchus. That's the singular. So we have two primary bronchus, which will be bronchi now. Then the primary bronchi, one going to right lung, one going to left, then will branch off to do the secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi. Okay. N-C-H-I. And then the secondary, and they go to each lobe of the lung. Each lobe of the lung. Then we go to the tertiary bronchi, which go to something called bronchopulmonary segments we'll talk about. Tertiary bronchi. Okay? They go to bronchopulmonary segments, and we'll talk about that. Then we have a bunch of divisions that don't have a specific name just to increase surface area. So it's really like a branching tree. You're coming down, you're branching, then you're branching off of that, then you're branching off of that, then you're branching off of that. And to increase surface area. Now, the first three bronchi had a name because they went to something. When I say other non-name, then you're just going down. Now, when I get to, I'm going to come here, we have, I'm going to put it down here, about 23 to 28 branchings, I'm going to say, off the trachea. I'll say after the trachea. So I'm saying that we have about 23, depends on which author you read, we have about 23 to 28 branchings. Now you say, what does that mean? That means after the trachea, the tree starts to branch. And some will say 23 times, some will say up to 28 in order to increase surface area. But see, you got to do it by branching because you can't make the body any bigger. Remember, we are mobile creatures. What are we? Mobile creatures, right? So we have to stay small in order to transverse gravity. So even though the respiratory system went inside, we had to branch it off to not allow to make our body have to get bigger. Then eventually we will finally become IOLE, bronchioles. This is kind of like arterioles. They're little, and we'll talk on those. Then we'll do several branchings off of those. Then we'll come to what we call a terminal bronchiole. Okay? And I made an error here. Let me throw something else in. I made an error. Then we come to something called the respiratory. Just thought about it. Respiratory bronchioles. See, I'm creating this as we go along. We come then to the respiratory bronchiole. Okay? Now, you say, what's wrong with this term here? Bring this down a little bit. What's wrong with this term right here is that, terminal means the end. But I'm bringing it back up again with a respiratory bronchiole. Now, I want you to think about this like you did with the blood vessels. Remember, in the blood vessels, the arteries and arterioles and venules and veins were conduits. The exchange vessel was what? The capillary, because it was thin. I want you to think about the respiratory system the same way. The first time that you get to the respiratory zone, which is really what you could call the exchange zone, is when you get to the respiratory bronchioles. Why? Because they're thin enough now. They're thin enough. Let me show you what I'm saying when we get further. They are then thin enough. See, you see how they're thick at first, and then it comes on down. We'll be talking about it later. They're finally thin enough to do diffusion, and we'll be looking at the diffusion equation in a little while. Okay? So this is to set you up and get you an understanding. So it starts to get thinner and thinner after the respiratory bronchiole into the alveolar duct, alveolar sac, and the magic boy is the alveolus. The alveolus is where we really do the major diffusion. Why? Because it's real thin. Nice and real thin. See, where did I put my thing? Right here. Nice and real thin. All right. So that kind of gives you an idea as to the progression. Okay. Now we're going to change, and I'm going to close this PowerPoint. This was my general. And then we're going to start with the nose. Okay. Thank you.